How could you betray me like this? You deserve exactly what's coming to you.
Please, I beg you, don't do this.
How could you do this? You knew the risks, and you did it anyway. Now look at the mess you've made.
The air in the warehouse smelled like dead air and concrete dust. There are no windows. There is no sound. The only thing moving was the slow drift of particles in the dark. A wooden coffin in the middle of that silence, closed tight, with a woman in it. Judy Loren pushed down on the lid with both hands flat against it. The wood stayed still. She pushed again. Her arms were shaking. The babies moved around inside her, pushing down on her ribs, and she made herself breathe slowly. Through the nose, out of the mouth, slow, in charge. Because she couldn't afford to panic right now, 8 months along in her pregnancy, by herself, locked in a coffin with no light. The air was getting thinner. She could feel it, but not in her lungs yet. It was on the edges of her thoughts. The slow cotton ball feeling that meant her body was using up reserves it didn't have. She ran her fingers along the inside seam of the wood, looking for a hole, a loose nail, or anything else. Her nails broke along the grain. She kept going. Hey viewers, how long do you think it would have taken you to realize that the person you trusted the most was the most dangerous person in your life? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know. The last thing she could clearly remember was the ride in the car. Kennedy had been talking the whole time they were driving. Calm, smiling, and he told her about the new distribution center he wanted to show her. He reached over and squeezed her hand at a red light, and she felt a little better. Things might have been getting better. Maybe the stress of the last few months was finally starting to go away. She might have been reading him wrong. She had been right about him. The car had stopped in front of a dark building on the edge of the industrial area outside of Baltimore. Kennedy opened the door for her and walked her inside with his hand on the small of her back. He never did that anymore. She could hear her own footsteps echoing across the empty floor. She remembered that she thought the space was strange. Not loud enough. Not full enough. No tools. No shelves. Nothing. She remembered asking him about it, and then the look on his face made her throat stop. No, it wasn't her husband's face. It was the face of a man who had already made up his mind, and was just finishing it. She woke up in the dark with wood very close to her nose. Now she lay still, taking short breaths and counting the seconds between each one. She could see the whole picture of what was going on. Kennedy had this all planned out. This meant that he had thought about it more than once. This meant that there was a version of him that she had been married to for years, but had never really seen. That thought should have made her cry. It didn't hurt her. It made her sharper. A woman who panics during a crisis is different from a woman who has been quietly getting ready for one. Judy Loren was the second type. She didn't know until tonight that the crisis would look like this. She carefully moved her weight around, trying to get a sense of how big the space around her was. There was enough room in the coffin for her belly to not be squished. Someone had thought about that carefully. She pushed her shoulder against the left side. Strong. She pushed the right button. Same. The bottom was made of flat wood. The lid above her head was the same. She spread her fingers and ran them along the top corners, looking for any place where the lid met the frame. There is a small space in the upper left corner. Not enough to make it happen. Not yet. But not enough to let a single finger through. She pushed her finger into the space and kept it there. Not trying to break the wood. Just letting the air from outside touch her skin. just remembering that there was an outside. Take a deep breath, think, stay here. Without her asking, her mind did the math on its own. Kennedy needed her to leave before the deal with the company was done. That meant that someone had to do something by a certain time. That meant there was a small but real chance that someone would notice she was gone. She didn't have her phone. She couldn't find her keys. But her papers were still there because he didn't know where she kept them. And that was the one thing that made her feel better in this situation. She thought about the twins. Not with fear, with something more difficult. She had not survived every quiet year of that marriage, every small humiliation, every meeting she was not allowed to go to, and every time she was given credit in front of a lot of people. She was not going to disappear in a Baltimore warehouse. She wasn't going to go away. She pushed on the lid again with her palms. This time she pushed from a different angle, aiming for the corner where she had found the hole. The wood made a noise, not very much, but it made a noise. She let out a breath, pushed again. The warehouse was empty and dark outside, on a road that only saw 3 cars an hour. And then, at the very end of the building, a single beam of headlights slowly moved across the floor. Someone was there. Judy Loren stopped pushing, stood completely still, and heard with all her might. The lights on the car didn't move. They came to a stop. The wood screamed when a crowbar hit the side of the coffin. Then there were voices. 2 of them. Not very important. A second hit on the lid. The nails bent. The lid opened up. The cold air came in so quickly that Judy gasped. A full or involuntary gasp that made her stand up before she could think about moving. A flashlight hit her in the face. One of the men said something mean to the other one, and she heard it. Then hands were under her arms, lifting her up carefully. She was out of the coffin and sitting on the cold floor of the warehouse with her back against a man's knee. The other man was already on his phone. She's alive. She's pregnant. Get the ambulance to Patterson Road right away. She wasn't able to talk yet. Her lungs were working too hard. But her eyes were moving around the room, taking in the 2 men, the black car parked near the side door, and the fact that neither of them was wearing a uniform. Not public. These people were private detectives. That meant that someone had sent them. She already knew who it was. Yeah, she just had to stay alive long enough to figure out why tonight was the night. It took 11 minutes for the ambulance to get there. Judy Loren didn't say anything important to anyone who was listening during those 11 minutes. She answered the questions about her health. She let them check her blood pressure and put oxygen on her face. She told them she was pregnant with twins and was 8 months along. She said that Kennedy Loren was the dad. She said his name in a calm voice, like someone would say the name of a street they used to live on. She didn't say that she already knew exactly what evidence she had against him and where it was. That could wait. First, she had to make sure the twins were safe. She was watched for 4 days at Johns Hopkins. The babies were under stress, but still holding on. By the second morning, and her blood pressure had dropped to a level that was manageable. She was able to sit up and eat on her own by the 3rd day. The nurses kept telling her how amazing she was. She didn't feel special. She felt like a woman who had to keep going because it was the only thing she could do. The 2nd day, Harold Milner came. He didn't bring flowers or make speeches. He brought 2 lawyers with him. A quiet woman named Sandra, who sat near the door and didn't say much, and a direct question that was asked right after he sat down. "How much of the tech did you make yourself?" For a long time, Judy looked at him. "Everything?" she said. Once Harold Milner nodded, like a man who already knew something confirming it. "Then we have things to do," he said. "This is what most people who are watching this story from the outside don't get. They want to know why she didn't see it sooner. The reason she stayed. Why she kept working on a business next to a man who was slowly taking her away. This is the truth. That man had not always been Kennedy Loren. There was a younger, hungrier version of him from years ago who really loved Judy Loren, who would stay up until 2 a.m. sitting across from her at a messy conference table, pizza getting cold, and fight about server architecture with the same energy that other couples used for vacations. That guy was real. She didn't make him up. At the time, she didn't know that success changes some people. Not for everyone, but only for some people. It takes away a pressure that was keeping something under control. And when that pressure goes away, what comes to the surface isn't always good. From the start, Kennedy Loren had a magnetic quality, self-assured without being loud. The kind of man who remembered names, made eye contact, and made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room full of people. People who put money into things loved him. People trusted him. Judy loved him in the simple way that people love someone before they get to know them well enough to see their flaws. They met while working on software solutions for freight logistics. She was in charge of the systems, like the routing algorithms, the predictive load balancing, and the architecture that would become the company's backbone. He was in charge of the relationships, like the pitch meetings, the investor dinners, and the handshakes. It worked because they both thought that the other person's job was just as important as their own, and that idea was the basis. And cracks can form in foundations without anyone noticing until the house is already leaning. The first year of their marriage went well. Really good. The business was getting bigger. The work had meaning. On their first anniversary, Kennedy drove her 2 hours outside of the city to a restaurant where there were no menus. Instead, you told the chef what you liked and didn't like and trusted him to make something around that. She had thought, while sitting across from Kennedy in that quiet dining room, that this was what it felt like to be understood. The first crack came in the second year. Harold Milner's investment company started keeping an eye on their business. This wasn't a surprise because their technology was getting a lot of attention, and Harold Milner's people had been circling for months. It was surprising how Kennedy reacted when Harold Milner asked to have a private technical meeting with Judy. 3 hours after that meeting, Harold Milner said something in a room where Kennedy was standing 10 feet away. "You are the real engineer behind this business," he told Judy. He meant it as a sign of respect. He didn't look at Kennedy when he said it. Kennedy heard everything. He didn't say anything. He smiled. He shook hands with Harold Milner, walked Judy to the car, opened her door, and said it had been a great meeting. He was quiet that night. He changed her calendar the next morning without asking. That was the start. By the third year, it had a shape she could name. Kennedy began attending investor meetings and explaining the platform's architecture in his own words. He wasn't wrong. But the way he did it made everyone in the room think he was the one who came up with the idea. He began copying himself on emails she had sent to clients and taking her out of the reply chains that followed. Little changes. The kind that looked like cleaning up the office if you only saw one of them. But Judy saw them all. She got a notebook made of leather. She didn't write in it in a dramatic way. She wrote in it like a scientist would write down information. The date, the event, the names of people who were there, what was said and what was changed. No editorializing, no feelings, just facts written down clearly. A consultant joined the company in the 4th year. Dana was her name. She was good at her job, and Kennedy told the team that she was there to help things run more smoothly. Judy saw how Kennedy looked at Dana during their first team meeting. She saw that Dana didn't even look at Judy. She also wrote that down. By the middle of year 4, Kennedy had opened a business account that she wasn't listed on. She found the statement by chance in a folder he had left in the home office. She took a picture of it. She wrote down the account number in her notebook. She put the statement back in the same place where she had found it. She didn't say anything. 2 things happened in year 5. First, Judy learned she was going to have twins. Second, Kennedy started working quietly with an outside lawyer to change the way the company was owned. She learned about the lawyer from a paper trail she had been following for 6 weeks. A series of consulting bills that didn't match any vendors she knew. When she checked the vendor's business registration, it came back to a shell company with a registered agent address in Delaware and no other presence. She took pictures of all the papers. In her notebook, she wrote down every little thing. She didn't say anything. She hadn't planned to confront Kennedy that night. She had planned to wait 3 more weeks. But when she got home, she saw the modified operating agreement open on his desk. This was the version that took her name out of the founding members section completely. Something inside her told her it was time to stop waiting. She went into the living room where he was watching TV and put the paper on the coffee table in front of him. He took a look at it. He then turned to her. And at that moment, she didn't see guilt on his face. It wasn't a surprise. It was math. At the look on a man's face as he quickly ran numbers on a situation he had already planned for. He had already gotten ready for this. So the warehouse, the Coffin, and the empty building outside of Baltimore were all planned out ahead of time. He had been making plans for it. He was going to make sure she never used the leather notebook she was writing about his betrayal in. Judy Loren didn't know. He couldn't have known because he hadn't been paying close attention to his wife for a long time. How far ahead of him she already was. On a Tuesday, Judy Loren had a baby. 6 weeks early, with Sandra the lawyer waiting in the hallway and Harold Milner's private security standing outside the room. 2 girls. Both of them were able to breathe on their own in just a few minutes. Claire and Dina were the names Judy gave them. Judy Loren did not call her. She told Sandra to make sure he only found out through legal means, and Sandra nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable request, which it was given the situation. Judy knew that she wasn't fully herself for the first 2 weeks after giving birth. That kind of tiredness is like its own kind of weather. It moves through you and changes things. She spent hours in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling and asking herself questions that she didn't know how to answer. If she had missed something early on that could have changed how this went. If she had let the business become more important than the red flags. If some part of her had known before she was ready to say it. That afternoon, when Sandra came over with food from the place down the street that Judy had said she liked once, and she asked Sandra those questions. Without saying anything, Sandra listened to everything. After that, she put down her coffee and said something that Judy remembered for a long time. Judy, a man who plans to lock his pregnant wife in a coffin was never going to listen to reason. You didn't miss the exit. He took it out. That was the last thing they said to each other. Judy asked for her notebook the next morning. Sandra had already gotten it from the house, along with 3 external hard drives, a fireproof document folder, and a sealed envelope from Judy's home office that held 2 years' worth of signed and printed records. Everything was in a safe place. Everything was fine. Judy Loren had not found any of it. There was no luck involved. Judy built her documentation system the same way she built her technology, with backups. There was nothing important that was only in one place. There were 2 digital backups in case Kennedy found the notebook. There were printed copies of the hard drives if he had found them. There was a third-party lawyer with a sealed file who was told to open it on a certain date no matter what happened if he had found the printed copies. Judy Loren had been underestimating what she did in the quiet for years. He still didn't think it was that bad. While Judy was in the hospital getting better, Harold Milner's investigators were putting together a picture that had been coming together for 14 months. Now, they began keeping an eye on Kennedy's finances the same week Harold Milner realized that the company's reported development timeline didn't match the actual architecture. This was years ahead of where it should have been if Kennedy's internal memos were correct. There was a lie in those memos, not Judy. The investigators' findings were layered and methodical, and in a way, they were almost impressive for how long they had gone unnoticed. 41 fake vendor invoices over 3 fiscal years sent company operating funds to the Delaware shell account. Kennedy signed a commercial lease for a property he had bought in his name only. But Judy's name was on it, a forged patent assignment document that changes the ownership of 2 of the platform's main process patents from joint ownership to Kennedy's name only. And the fake items weren't perfect. They were done quickly. Probably in the last year when Kennedy realized the company was about to be sold and the deadline was getting closer. Quick work leaves behind signs. The forensic accountant Harold Milner hired found the first mistake in 11 days. It took 6 weeks to write the full fraud report. Judy read it on a Thursday morning in a quiet conference room at Harold Milner's law office. Claire and Dina were in a stroller next to her. She read all 47 pages. She asked 3 technical questions about the fake patent assignments. She said thank you to the forensic accountant by name. After that, she asked Sandra to bring in the paper they had been working on. The assignment on intellectual property. Everything. All algorithms, all process patents. Judy wrote every line of code. Transferring to a new entity was done legally, with a clear chain of documents that went back years before Kennedy's forgeries. Just her name. She signed it on page 14. She put the cap on the pen. She looked at Claire and Dina in the stroller. "Okay," she said in a low voice. "Now we start building." That same week, Harold Milner's team started working on the new company. During her weeks in the hospital recovering, Judy had already come up with the next version of the platform in her head. On the 4th day, she asked Sandra for a legal pad, and by the 9th day, she had filled it. The new building wasn't just a copy of the old one. It was better, more effective. She built it with 3 years' worth of extra data she had passively collected while running the original. She also added 2 structural improvements she had found in year 4 but never used because Kennedy didn't understand how valuable they were and didn't want to spend the development budget. There was no Kennedy to ask now. Loren Systems was the name of the new business. The name was not very subtle. She didn't mean for it to be that way. Judy Loren was doing exactly what she thought he would do, while Loren Systems was being built in secure offices in a building that Judy Loren couldn't get to. He was doing something. He had told the company's current investors that Judy had a mental breakdown while she was pregnant and couldn't make business decisions. He told 2 members of the board that she had left the company on her own. He told Dana, the consultant, that Judy was the one who wanted the divorce. He was sure of what he was saying when he told these stories because he believed 2 things. First, that Judy was alone, hurt, and poor. Second, that the warehouse had fixed his problem for good. He didn't know where Judy was. He didn't know what she had. He had no idea that 3 federal investigators were quietly watching the sale of the company he was planning to close in 4 months. They had been briefed by Harold Milner's legal team and were looking at the forged documents with the kind of care that ends careers. He had no idea that in 9 weeks, the logistics industry's biggest annual conference in New York, where he was supposed to speak as the founder and visionary of a successful American freight technology company, was going to be the worst morning of his life. Judy Loren was getting ready to give a speech. while Judy Loren was getting ready for something else. Kennedy Loren walked into the New York Logistics Summit like he had already won. That was the first error. He had flown in the night before and stayed at a hotel 3 blocks from the Javits Center. He knew his speech by heart. He got a new suit. He had Dana sitting in the 3rd row of the auditorium with a reserved seat and a program that listed his name under the keynote section. The bio said that he was the founder and chief architect of one of the most innovative freight technology platforms in the country. He had read that bio 4 times on the plane. He hadn't changed a thing. 9 weeks ago, Judy Loren sat in Harold Milner's conference room in Baltimore with a legal pad full of notes and said exactly 6 words to Sandra and the 2 lead lawyers across the table. Oh, he won't see it coming. Not as a threat, not with any real heat behind it. She said it the way someone states a weather forecast, as something that has already been determined by forces already in motion, and is simply waiting for the appointed time to arrive. The preparation had been quiet and total. Loren's systems had been incorporated, funded, and staffed in 8 weeks. The platform was rebuilt, faster, cleaner, more capable than the original. Harold Milner's investment had funded the entire operation, and the terms of that funding were straightforward. Judy retained full ownership and creative control. Harold Milner held a minority equity stake in exchange for capital. There were no clauses that required her approval for his decisions. There were no clauses that required his approval for hers. Now, Harold Milner had insisted on that structure. He said a partnership only works if neither person is afraid to disagree with the other. Judy had looked at him across the conference table and said that was the most sensible thing anyone had said to her in years. The new platform had already signed 3 pilot clients before the conference: a regional carrier in Texas, a cold chain logistics company out of Ohio, and a federal supply contractor that Harold Milner's network had quietly introduced her to. None of these deals had been announced publicly. None of the documentation had been filed anywhere Kennedy Loren would see it. Everything had been designed to arrive at one moment. This moment. While Kennedy was rehearsing his speech in a Manhattan hotel room, Judy was in a midtown office 2 miles away, reviewing the final version of a presentation deck that Sandra had spent the last 3 weeks building with the forensic accountant and Harold Milner's media team. The deck was 41 slides. It contained financial records, original development logs with timestamps, internal emails, the forensic forgery analysis, patent filing dates, and a side-by-side comparison of Kennedy's public statements about the platform's architecture against the actual development records that showed who had written what and when. It was not a revenge presentation. It was a documentation of fact. The difference mattered. Judy had been clear about that from the first meeting when the conference plan came together. She was not walking into that auditorium to humiliate Kennedy Loren. No, she was walking in to correct the public record. Those were 2 different things with 2 very different energies, and she needed everyone on her team to understand which one they were executing. Sandra understood. Harold Milner understood. The forensic accountant, a precise and quiet man named Dr. Raymond Cole, who had been doing this work for 22 years, looked at Judy across the table and said he had testified in 40 federal cases, and this was one of the 3 cleanest documentation packages he had ever assembled. Judy thanked him and asked if the timestamp chain on the patent assignments would hold under cross-examination. He said it would hold under anything. Good. That afternoon, Judy had gone back to the hotel room Sandra had booked for her under a different name. She showered. Yes, she sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes with her eyes closed and her hands flat on her knees. She was not nervous. That surprised her. She had expected to be nervous, and she was not. What she felt was something closer to clarity, the kind that comes after a very long fog finally lifts. She thought about Claire and Dina, who were with Harold Milner's household staff and a nurse Judy trusted completely. 40 blocks uptown. She thought about the leather notebook sitting in her bag. She thought about the Tuesday night in Baltimore when she had pressed her finger through a gap in a coffin lid and breathed warehouse air and told herself she was not going to disappear. She picked up the phone and called Sandra. "Are we ready?" she asked. "Everything is loaded. The AV team confirmed the connection twice. Raymond will be in the back. I'll be stage right." "And Harold?" "Front row center, his idea." Judy almost smiled at that. She stood up and looked at the clothes laid out on the chair by the window. Not the worn maternity clothes from the hospital. Not the quiet, practical things she had lived in for the past several months. She had asked Sandra to help her find something specific. Something that said exactly what she needed it to say, without using any words. She dressed slowly. Dark navy, clean lines, a single gold bracelet that had belonged to her mother, hair pulled back simply. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a long moment. The woman in the mirror did not look like someone who had survived a coffin. She did not look broken or recovering or fragile. She looked like the architect of something. She looked like herself. Back at the Javits Center, Judy Loren was 40 minutes from taking the stage. He had done a sound check. He had shaken hands with the conference organizer. He had smiled for a photo with 2 industry journalists who had asked him 3 questions about innovation in the freight sector, all of which he had answered smoothly and confidently. And he had felt, standing there in his new suit, with the Manhattan skyline visible through the glass behind him, that everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He had one remaining concern. He had not been able to reach his attorney in 3 days. The attorney handling the company sale, the same attorney who had been coordinating the amended ownership documents, had stopped returning calls on Monday. His office had sent a brief email saying he was unavailable due to a personal matter and that someone from the firm would be in touch. Kennedy had told himself it was nothing. Deals like this had friction all the time. It would sort itself out after the conference when he had the momentum of the keynote behind him and the investors in the room had seen him perform. He told himself that 4 separate times. He still had the faint, uncomfortable feeling of a man who has just realized he left the stove on. Not certain of danger yet, but unable to fully put it out of his mind. He went backstage. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The conference moderator stepped to the podium and began his introduction. Kennedy straightened his jacket, rolled his shoulders once, took a full breath. He walked out onto that stage. The applause was real. 300 people in seats. Investors, industry leaders, tech executives, journalists, all of them watching. All of them expecting exactly what the program had promised. A founder's keynote about building one of the most successful freight platforms of the last decade. Kennedy reached the podium and smiled. He looked out at the room. He found Dana's face in the 3rd row. She smiled back. He found Harold Milner's face in the front row. Harold Milner was not smiling. Something in Kennedy's chest pulled tight. He looked away from Harold Milner and opened with his first line, a line he had practiced until it came out clean and natural, about how the best technology is never the loudest in the room. The audience nodded. A few people wrote things down. Kennedy moved into the 2nd section of his speech. The company's origin story, the early development, the architecture decisions that had made the platform scalable. He talked about it the way he always talked about it, with ownership, with fluency, with the confidence of a man describing something he had built with his own hands. He was 4 minutes in when the lights changed. Not the house lights. Not a technical flicker. The screen behind him, the large rear projection screen that had been showing a simple conference graphic, went dark for exactly 2 seconds. Then it turned on. Kennedy turned around and stopped speaking entirely. The first slide showed a system architecture diagram, not a stock graphic, not a simplified chart for a general audience. A real, detailed, technical architecture map, server layers, routing logic, algorithm decision trees. The kind of document that only existed internally, that only one person in the world had built from scratch, and that Judy Loren had been describing as his own creation for the last 4 minutes. The timestamp on the document read 4 years earlier. The author field read, Judy Loren, lead systems architect. The room was very quiet. Kennedy turned back to face the audience. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the moderator standing off stage. The moderator looked back at him without moving. The second slide came up. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, Kennedy's published interviews and investor presentations, direct quotes describing his technical decisions, his architectural choices, his engineering vision. On the right, the internal development logs, time-stamped commits, design documents, decision memos, every single one authored by Judy Loren, predating Kennedy's public statements by months or years. The room was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The third slide was the forensic forgery summary. 41 fraudulent invoices, the forged signature on the commercial lease, the amended patent assignment documents. Each item presented cleanly, factually, with case reference numbers in the bottom right corner. Case reference numbers, federal ones. A woman in the fourth row leaned over to the man beside her and said something low. In the third row, Dana had stopped smiling. She was sitting completely still with her program held flat in both hands, staring at the screen like she was trying to decide whether to stay in her seat. She was not going to like what came next. The fourth slide showed financial records, the Delaware Shell account, the redirected vendor payments, the amounts, the dates, the transfer trail. All of it laid out in the plain language of a forensic accountant who had been doing this work since before Judy Loren started his company. A man in the second row, a senior investor Judy recognized from 3 years of board meetings, stood up and walked out of the auditorium. Kennedy gripped the sides of the podium. Then the fifth slide came up. One line of text, white letters on a dark background, large enough to read from the back of the room. Founder and lead systems architect, Judy Loren. And then she walked through the side door. She did not rush. She did not look at Kennedy first. She walked to the center of the stage at the pace of someone who is exactly where they belong, in a room that was holding its breath. And she stopped 6 feet from the podium and faced the audience. 300 people looked at her. The room stayed silent. Harold Milner, in the front row, sat with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on Judy, with an expression that was not triumph and was not pity. It was something quieter than both of those. It was recognition. The look of a man watching someone become fully visible after a very long time of being deliberately kept in the dark. Judy held the leather notebook at her side. She did not open it. She did not need to. Every number, every date, and every name in that book had already been transferred to slides that 300 people in this room were now reading. The notebook had done its job. She had brought it because it was the truest object she owned, the record of years of quiet, careful, determined refusal to be erased. She looked at the audience. When she spoke, her voice was level and clear. My name is Judy Loren. I am the founding systems architect of the platform this conference invited my former husband to speak about today. Every algorithm in that system, every process patent, every core architectural decision, I designed and built those. The documentation is behind me and has been verified by an independent forensic firm. She paused. I am not here to conduct a trial. Federal investigators are handling that process on their own timeline. I am here because this industry deserves accurate information. And because the technology this room has been discussing for the last 4 minutes deserves to be credited to the person who actually created it. She turned her head and looked at Kennedy Loren for the first and only time. He was still holding the podium. His face had gone through several things in the last 3 minutes and had settled on something that looked like a man standing on ice that is cracking in every direction at once, trying to calculate which way to move and finding that every option leads to the same result. There was no version of this moment where Kennedy Loren walked out of that room intact. He had built his entire public identity on a foundation he had stolen. And the person he stole it from was standing 6 feet away, as in front of 300 people, holding the proof. Judy looked at him for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned back to the audience. Loren Systems launched this month. The next generation of the platform is operational. 3 clients are already in pilot phase. We are accepting introductions. She picked up the microphone from the podium and set it back in the stand. She walked off the stage the same way she had walked on. No rushing, no theater. Just the measured steps of a woman who had finished what she came to do. Behind her, she heard Kennedy finally speak. He said her name, just once. She did not turn around. The moderator stepped back to the podium within 30 seconds and said something about a brief intermission. It did not help. The room was already moving. People standing, phones out, the conversations erupting in low, urgent voices across every row. The senior investor who had walked out was already on a call in the hallway. 2 journalists were moving toward the side door Judy had come through. Harold Milner stood up from the front row and walked in the same direction. Kennedy Loren stood at the podium alone. Dana had left her seat. The investors he had been counting on were texting people he would never speak to again. His attorney, the one who had stopped returning calls on Monday, was at that exact moment 3 blocks away in a federal building answering questions about the forged documents under conditions that did not permit him to leave until the questions were finished. Kennedy's phone was going to start ringing in approximately 4 hours. By that evening, the first investor had issued a formal withdrawal notice. By the following morning, 2 others had followed. The amended patent assignments were frozen by court order within 72 hours. The Delaware shell account was seized. The company's sale, the sale Kennedy had been engineering for 2 years, the sale he had locked his pregnant wife in a coffin to protect, was dead. The investigation took 14 months. Kennedy Loren was indicted on 6 counts. He did not go to trial. He reached a plea agreement that required him to surrender all claims to the original company's intellectual property and pay restitution in an amount that took everything he had built and most of what he thought he had protected. He lost the company. He lost the investors. He lost the public identity he had constructed word by word over a decade. Dana left 4 months after the conference. Not dramatically. She simply stopped being available, the way people do when a situation stops offering them anything. Kennedy Loren ended up in a small apartment in Delaware, working a consulting contract that paid him a fraction of what he had once described as walking around money. He had believed, for years, that Judy Loren was the quiet part of their operation, the background work, the technical engine that needed someone like him to give it meaning in the world. He had been catastrophically wrong about that. Judy Loren did not watch any of it happen in real time. She had a company to run. Loren Systems grew faster than the original, not just because the technology was stronger, though it was, but because Judy ran it differently. Then she built a culture where the people doing the technical work were the people in the meetings, where credit went to the person who earned it, where no one had to document their own contributions in a secret leather notebook just to protect what was already theirs. By the second year, they had 11 clients and 2 government contracts. By the third year, the platform was being cited in industry publications as one of the most efficient freight optimization systems operating in the country. Dr. Raymond Cole, the forensic accountant, sent a brief handwritten note when he saw the first industry write-up. It said, "I always knew the math was right. Congratulations." She kept that note. Harold Milner remained a constant presence, not as a rescuer, not as a patron. He showed up as a partner. He asked hard questions about her decisions and expected real answers. He disagreed with her about hiring once, and she held her position. And he accepted it and told her she had made the better call. He had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and he introduced them to Judy without ceremony, the way people introduce things that are simply part of their life now. The relationship between Harold Milner and Judy Loren built itself the way strong things tend to build, slowly, without announcement, from consistent behavior over time. They married 3 years after the conference in a small ceremony with a short guest list and no photographers hired for the occasion. Sandra was there. Dr. Raymond Cole was there. The 2 pilots' clients from Texas and Ohio sent flowers. Claire and Dina were 4 years old. They stood in the front row holding flowers they kept dropping and picking up again, and Harold Milner held Dina's flower every time she dropped it and handed it back without breaking his conversation with the person beside him. And Judy watched that small automatic gesture from across the room and thought, "Yes, this is right." On a Sunday evening, about a month after the wedding, Judy sat on the back porch of their home outside the city. The yard was quiet. Claire and Dina were running circles around the oak tree at the far end of the lawn in a game that had rules neither of them could explain, but both of them understood perfectly. The leather notebook was on the table beside her. She had not written in it in 2 years. There was nothing left to document. As what it held now was not a record of injuries, but a record of how far she had traveled from the night those injuries began. She kept it because objects that have carried weight through hard years deserve to rest somewhere safe rather than be thrown away. She watched her daughters play. She thought about nothing in particular for a long time. Here is what Judy Loren's story says to anyone paying close attention. Silence is not weakness. Silence is sometimes the sound of someone building something you cannot see yet. The people who try hardest to erase someone are usually the people who understand, somewhere below their own awareness, exactly how dangerous that person's competence truly is. And the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman who knows how to build systems from nothing is take everything from her. Yeah, because she will simply build again. Only better this time, and on her own terms. If Judy Loren's story stayed with you today, if you have ever had your work taken, your voice ignored, or your quiet strength mistaken for having nothing to offer, this channel exists for stories exactly like hers. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. Every week this channel brings you real stories of strength, patience, and the kind of justice that arrives quietly but lands completely. You do not want to miss what comes next. And before you go, leave your answer in the comments. If you were Judy Loren, standing on that stage with the proof in your hand and 300 people watching, would you have exposed Kennedy Loren exactly the way she did? Or would you have taken the company, taken the victory, and walked away without ever letting him see your face again? Tell me what you would have done. And if this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. The person you send this to might be carrying more than you know.